thank you very much for joining us today. Today I have Dr. Brownstein with us, and he's the author of about 11 books, and two of those being Iodine, Why You Need It, and Overcoming Thyroid Disorders. We're going to talk a lot about iodine and thyroid today. And he's also an allopathic doctor turned holistic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
Okay, so firstly, iodine consumption has gone down by 50% over the last 40 years. And obviously, there's a huge need for it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why there might be a need for it and who should be taking it?
Iodine's an essential item. We can't live without it. Every cell in the body depends on iodine to function normally. The glands particularly concentrate iodine against the gradient in the body, and that includes the thyroid, the ovaries, uterus, the breast, and the prostate. And if we look at what tissues we're having major problems with right now, it's the glands. Mm-hmm. We have 1 in 7 women with breast cancer, 1 in 3 men with prostate cancer. We have an epidemic of thyroid disorders from hypothyroidism to autoimmune thyroid illness to thyroid cancer, and a whole host of other glandular problems. And I think it's directly related to this iodine deficiency epidemic that we're facing.
Okay. And you mentioned pregnancy. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the statistics on that? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, that is our future.
Well, the latest studies from the NHANES study in the U.S. is that nearly 60% of pregnancy-aged women in the U.S. are iodine deficient. And these numbers are a disaster because if the mother doesn't have enough iodine before she's pregnant, the baby's thyroid won't develop normally, the baby's glandular system won't develop normally, and the baby's IQ will suffer from that. And I showed those slides to you last night in that talk. And I think that we're facing this crisis of autism and ADD and all these childhood behavioral disorders, either directly related or in large part directly related to nutritional deficiencies and hormonal imbalances and toxicities. And I say the major nutritional deficiency we're seeing right now is iodine deficiency.
Mm-hmm. And I know iodine used to be the most used drug in medicine, and now it's the most feared mineral in medicine. So can you tell me a little bit about why that happened? Because obviously there's a lot of misconceptions out there about iodine.
You know, I refer to iodine as the most misunderstood nutrient because we can't live without it, and yet conventional doctors will say nobody needs to take iodine, they get enough iodine and salt. And I can tell you that conventional doctors are suffering from iodophobia, and they don't know the research behind iodine, they don't know how to use iodine, they don't understand the biochemistry behind iodine and how it impacts the human physiology. But as our iodine levels have fallen 50% and over 50% in the last 40 years, all those chronic illnesses are going up, as I mentioned before. And either we get a handle on this or I don't see us getting control of our healthcare costs.
Yeah, and you're saying that even though salt is iodized, a lot of people get most of their iodine, we're not getting enough. Why is that?
Well, most people are afraid of using salt because the powers that be have made us fear salt. What they don't tell us is that salt's the second major constituent in our body next to water. Mm-hmm. We need salt. We need a lot of salt to run thousands of reactions in the body to support the thyroid, to support the adrenal glands. And my experience of testing every new patient that walks in my door for the last 20 years is the vast majority of them, over 90%, are salt deficient. So I actively use salt in my practice and encourage my patients to get their salt levels up to where they should be, because when salt levels fall, blood pressure goes up, cardiovascular disease goes up, the lipid levels get all screwy, thyroid and adrenal dysfunction happens. So we need salt, and unfortunately, to say that we need iodine from salt is not the way to do it, because studies show that only 10% of the iodine in salt is bioavailable. It's not the best way to get iodine in our body.
Okay, so what is the best way to get iodine?
Well, the best way would be eat foods high in iodine, such as seaweed or seafood. The problem now is that our oceans are polluted, and with the Fukushima disaster, the question is the seafood we're eating safe right now? And when you throw in the toxicity of halides like bromide and fluoride that have gone way up in our bodies, and I've tested over 1,000 patients for bromide toxicity. They've all had bromide toxicity, healthy and sick patients alike. Now, sick patients generally have a little bit more, mm-hmm. but bromide will kick iodine out of the body, and we're getting bromide from fire retardants in carpet and clothing, it's in food and brominated vegetable oils, it's in brominated flour and all our breads, pasta, and cereal. And our iodine requirements have gone up over the last 40 years when they've actually gone down, and that's led to an increased toxicity and increased iodine deficiency disorder problem.
So there's kind of like a competition in the body for these parking spots, for these receptors, for these different halides. So if someone is toxic with bromine, chlorine, fluoride, once they start taking iodine, does that have any detoxification effect?
Absolutely. And my experience has shown over the last 20 years, everyone's bromide levels have gone up, their fluoride levels have gone up. At the same time, iodine levels are dropped. And again, to belabor the same point,
right.
I think that's why 1 in 7 women are having breast cancer and 1 in 3 men are suffering with prostate cancer. And then we couple all the thyroid disorders out there. I think it's directly related to iodine deficiency. So yes, the long answer to your question is yes. If you get too much of the toxic halide, halides are a family in the periodic
right.
table.
Right.
Bromide, fluoride, chloride, and iodine. If you get too much of one, you can kick out the other one. Of those halides, there are only 2 that are essential for our body, chloride and iodine. Fluoride and bromide are not. Those are the 2 we're getting in too much right now. And it's kicking out too much iodine and leaving us with this iodine deficiency epidemic we're seeing. So yes, when you start taking iodine, you can detox from those toxic halides. And really, that's where that salt comes into play that I write about in my book.
Okay.
That you need more salt in your diet. That's another reason why we need to increase our salt intake.
Great. And in terms of the thyroid, the typical test that most doctors will give is TSH, is that enough, or do we need to be looking at other stuff? And second part of the question is, when they do find hypothyroidism, they give something like Synthroid T4. Is that enough as well, or do we need to do other things?
You were in my lecture yesterday. I hope you know the answer to those questions already. But first part of the question, the TSH test. The TSH measures thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a hormone coming from the pituitary gland, which comes down from the brain and stimulates the thyroid to release thyroid hormone. It's an okay test, but it's not the absolute test that conventional doctors think it is. And I think there's valuable information from it, but it shouldn't be the sole test used to determine whether there's a thyroid problem or not. So there's other thyroid tests like T3 and T4 and reverse T3 that should be part of that workup too, to decide whether someone has a thyroid problem. Once you decide treatment, you have two major choices out there. One is synthetic thyroid hormone like Synthroid or Levothyroid, or desiccated thyroid, which is sometimes referred to as natural thyroid hormone. Mm-hmm. And in my experience with deficiencies that people have, the stuff that's in the glandular, the natural desiccated thyroid, works a little bit better than the synthetic thyroid hormone most of the time.
Mm-hmm. And I found it interesting, you were talking about iodine usage, that you were sort of masking iodine deficiencies for a while just using thyroid hormone, or even desiccated thyroid hormone.
So there's studies that show that women who take thyroid hormone for over 15 years have a 50% increased risk of breast cancer versus women who don't take thyroid hormone. What's happened is, if you're taking thyroid hormone and you're iodine deficient, you're making the iodine deficiency problem worse. You're increasing the metabolism of the body. So I can tell you from the first 10 years of my practice of not using iodine, the next 10 years of using iodine, my thyroid hormone usage in my patients has gone down from about 60% to about 20 to 25%. And those 40% difference in patients didn't need thyroid hormone, even though they were feeling better with it. They needed to fix what was wrong with their thyroid, which was iodine deficiency. And really giving them thyroid hormone was the wrong thing to do. It was making the iodine deficiency problem worse.
Okay. So as a first line of defense, you would say start with the iodine for people with thyroid issues?
I would say they should have their iodine levels checked. And if they're iodine deficient and they need thyroid hormone, either you start them concurrently or start the iodine first and then reevaluate how the thyroid's doing. But you should never put someone who's iodine deficient on thyroid hormone first.
Okay. And is there anyone who should not have iodine?
Well, sure. There's not one thing that's perfect for everybody, mm-hmm. and there's people who can have allergies to it. As human beings, we all need iodine. We can't live without it. Now, the question is who's got enough and who doesn't have enough. I've tested, between me and my partners, over 6,000 patients. Over 96% are deficient in iodine, with the vast majority of them markedly deficient in iodine. Those are pretty big numbers. Not everybody needs iodine, but if the major sources of iodine in our diet really come from seaweed and seafood. Mm-hmm. And if people aren't eating enough seaweed, or if soil where they live doesn't have enough iodine in it, I find in our toxic world, they're going to have a hard time maintaining their iodine levels up to snuff.
Right. And I mean, that food supply, that fish and our seaweed is being compromised now anyway, so that makes it even more difficult.
It makes it more difficult, and then you throw in the bromine that's all over our environment in our food, drink, and consumer supplies. We have a big whammy, a double, triple whammy on our hands with this.
So what supplement would people take to get their iodine?
So if they need to supplement with iodine, I recommend using a combination of iodine and iodine. The old-time standby is Lugol solution. It was developed in the 1800s from Dr. Lugol's. It worked then, it works now, and there's tableted Lugol solutions that are on the market right now too that are available. I say either one of those are the best sources for what we need today.
Okay, awesome. And then just one more thing that really stood out for me was you mentioned that 50% of people with cysts or nodules who start iodine have shrinkage up to nothing, and the other 50% stop progression. Is there any situations where those nodules have not stopped progression, have not shrunk, and in those situations?
Well, sure, I've had my failures, and it doesn't work for everybody, but the vast majority of people with cysts and nodules and hyperplasia and precancerous changes or cancerous changes in those glandular tissues, thyroid, ovaries, uterus, breast, and prostate, get better with iodine. Now, have I had my failures? Sure I have. But if we can catch it early enough, that number that I gave you, that 50% number holds true, and I've seen those cysts and nodules go away in a significant proportion of patients using iodine.
Wonderful information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.